I'm going to share my screen. Just give me a second. Yes. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Nice. Okay. So I want to talk about design primitives for React developers. Uh, let me set some context. So I'm Sid. I'm a developer at Code Sandbox. And before this, I used to work at the design system team at Auth0. All of the links and articles that I share in this talk are on this URL. It's like sid.st/primitives, right? So if you like everything I mention, there's a link to that in that URL, which you can see later. I'm a developer, but I really like design. But like, don't get me wrong, liking design doesn't mean that I'm good at design. So I'm pretty bad. To set the context, let me show you like what my process looks like. So this is, I recorded myself trying to build something. So I was trying to build like a vacation rental kind of an app, something like an Airbnb. And you can see I added all the input elements first, right? I'm adding the label and the inputs. And then this is like, after this, I wanted to style it, right? So what you usually do is, right, you put some margins first, right? That's where you start. And then I put some label, change the fonts, made everything like bigger. The default sizes are very small. And then I was trying to do border radius where like this weird border came because that's the browser's default. So then you got to inspect element. And then I'm trying to see like, is 5 pixel good, or is like, then I'm like trying down and saying it's 3 pixel is better, or 5 pixel or 4, right? So you have to kind of try it. You have to override the default, and then, you know, this is how I choose my color. I pick something name and then try to like move around, and then, you know, hit and try something looks good, then I use it. This has kind of been my process for a really long time. And then, you know, same goes for the button. I wanted to look like the Airbnb pink. So again, go to the color picker, pick something. This whole thing kind of did not look like it was in a place. So I tried to put it in a card. You know, I put the card, and the card is white, and then you need a background. So there's this like hipster tailwheel blue that is trending these days. So I tried to do that. And then I'm giving it like some padding so that it looks contained in a card. Same thing for shadows. Use the dev tools to tweak the shadow a little, and then, you know, this is kind of the output. So let me show you that. This is what I could come up with, right? And as you can see, like, it doesn't. Well, first of all, I want to know like who else, like who can relate to this process. Does your like front end design process look the same when you're working on a side project or something, right? If you can, I think if you drop anything in the chat, I can see the notifications there, right? So if it's relatable, let me know. So this looks fine. I mean, it's a thing, but it doesn't really look like it doesn't look like a website you would actually put your credit card and book a vacation, right? It kind of looks shady. So it doesn't really look how it should. So I kind of went and like tried to learn about design, right? Where do I start? So I read a bunch of theory where I started with like, okay, there's RGB and there's CMYK. These are like the different kind of, what do you say, color modes that people use. And oops, sorry, let me click here. And then there's this like theory about complementary colors and analogous colors, and then like on the color wheel, and there's triadic colors, which are on 3 ends of the triangle. So for example, this logo uses 2 opposite ends, like almost, and it looks good, right? I learned that Burger King uses like a triadic thing where it uses the 3 colors which are in the opposite, like make a triangle on the color wheel, and it kind of looks, it's supposed to look good. Then I also learned about fonts. So you know how serif fonts and sans serif fonts are there, and then when to use them. So for example, Uber, when they did the redesign, they chose like a sans serif font, but also like a very rounded font so that the brand looks more friendly. And then the New York Times has a very sans serif kind of thing. Like it's a very old school authoritative kind of vibe, which is, I guess, what they're going for with the news website. So all of that really helped to like at least like get the vocabulary and know how people make decisions. But it really didn't help me when I would look at this, right? When I'm starting from this point, I still didn't know what to do, right? Like I still don't know what colors or like how much padding or like all of that was still like the theory was there, but it didn't really help me in practice. And I looked at like other sites, right? Like where can I essentially learn from? Who can I copy? Who can I get inspired from? So I looked at Google Slides, and Google Slides looks great. I looked at Airbnb, the one I was trying to imitate. That looks amazing. And it kind of like went back to like my own design, and it has all like the design theory, but it just does not look good. So then I was like, maybe, maybe design is not something that you can actually like learn from theory. Maybe it's just like some people are good at design because they have great taste, and just like the rest of us are bad at design because we just don't have good taste, right? That's what it comes down to. So that's what I thought, that like that was it. um, but then I kind of like started working in design system teams, and that kind of opened my world to this whole concept of like how much of design is art and how much of it is science. So I of course, like like I don't have great taste, so I gravitated towards the science side of design systems, like science side of design, and it's like what is the science behind these things. So most of it was from like the design system teams that I work in. I'm going to reorder the slide. And this is what I learned. So I want to share what I've learned with you. So the first concept that's kind of core to all of this is this concept of modular scales. And the concept of modular scales is that this is from Tim Brown. He wrote an article for Register Part. He said by using culturally relevant, historically pleasing ratios, right? So the moment I hear ratios, I'm like, okay, this is maths now, right? It's fractions. And it's like basing the measurements of our composition or interfaces on values from a scale. This part didn't make sense to me. We can achieve a visual harmony, right? Not found in layouts that use arbitrary, conventional, or easy divisible numbers. So this was kind of like a call out, right? I felt called out because my design process was basically arbitrary. I would go look at what other people are doing and then go to my color picker and try to do something similar, and it just would not look good. But then this word, which is visual harmony, kind of really, like, that was the word that I was missing. That what does visual harmony mean? And then when I searched more, it kind of opened this entire world. So I've tried to make those. Can I click this? Like, no. I've tried to make those concepts. I've tried to like expose those concepts for myself, like as a developer, and to like other people who work with React in this library I called React UI. And it's not like built from scratch. It's not unique ideas. It's built on system UI, style system, emotion.js, and a bunch of design theory that I read. So if you go to the website or the GitHub repo, there is getting started. And even if you like don't use React or don't want to use a library, I've written a lot about like what are the ideas inside it. So a lot of ideas that I learned are kind of documented. So even if you don't want to use the library, it would be really interesting to just like see what are the concepts. I'll highlight like some of the key concepts. So let's talk about typography first. And there's like typography, color space. Typography is the first one to talk about. So browsers come with the 16 pixel default for body. And this is like, if you put 16 pixel, you kind of get some size. Now, how do you create more sizes for yourself? There's this theory around harmonious scales or modular scales, which basically says if you multiply that with the same number over and over, you kind of get a scale, right? So for example, if you have 1.125, if I multiply 16, I get 18. Now I can multiply 18 and get another number, and I keep getting a scale which goes up, and then I can divide to keep getting numbers that go down. How did I get this random number? It's like this tons of research. You can go to Modular Scale. I've also linked it in the this link that I shared at the starting. So these are all of the multipliers essentially that a bunch of people have put research in, and you can see like the names kind of match. A lot of names match music. So like how music has octaves and thirds and notes, it kind of goes on the same theory on like what is harmonious. But some of these are also like from other things, like from nature. Like golden ratio comes from basically observing nature. So I don't fully understand why these numbers are the numbers they are, but like that's fine. I kind of only understand the what do you say, like what do I have to multiply with? So then I picked this number because it created like a small, like I was building an application, so I wanted something close by, like a tens kind of set. So I multiplied by the, I chose major second. And this is basically my scale. Sorry. Yeah, so this is basically my scale. And then how do you represent this in React? So, well, let me, different tab. Okay, so I basically have this application here which imports the theme provider from React UI. The implementation details are boring. You don't have to really care about that. But you basically wrap in a theme provider, and this is what my theme looks like. So uh, it's how I represent these values is basically in an object, right? I say font sizes, and I go from 0 to 10, and 0 is like, I just like 0 being 0, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, like I just put them in a scale. And what this does is that if you use a text component, then you kind of can say text size 1, size 2, size 3, right? So you kind of get a scale for yourself. And then when you have to choose a value, you're not really right clicking inspect, like you're not really doing hit and trial, right? Because then it comes down to like, how good is your design taste that you can hit and try and actually get something good. This kind of relies on like, I created a scale first based on some math, based on some ratios. And now when I want to choose, I go up and down in this. So let me show you an example which kind of makes this point slightly nicer to understand. Okay, let's see. Whoops, now it runs by. Perfect. So this is like this is basically copied from Airbnb, where I have this image and then I have these 3 text lines. So now the decisions I'm making are not so much about like what's the font size, what's the color. I'm thinking about what is the most important information here, right? So I'd say the stunning, like the label is kind of important. This is what you'd remember. The entire apartment is useful, but it's secondary information. So if I have these text size, I would say like this should be a smaller size, right? It's slightly smaller. Maybe I want to go a little more small. Okay, this feels okay, but maybe this feels too less, right? So I'm going to stick to 3. So you see, I'm still doing trial and error, right? I'm not an expert. I'm still like experimenting on what looks good to the eye. But having this set, I'm only experimenting. Like if something is less important, I'm going to tone it down by 1 size. If something is more important, I'm going to tone it up for 1 size, right? So it kind of gives you like these constraints to actually design. Similarly, I think like the price can be slightly smaller so that it's secondary information. But maybe it should be bold because, like, let's be honest, that's what a lot of people would make their decisions on, right? Maybe the size was fine. Yeah. So it kind of gives you like this essentially these like values that you don't have to experiment from scratch. You kind of have to like stick to the scale, and what comes out would be better. So let's go. Let's look at another one of these, right? So color is another thing that is slightly it's interesting. So right, my instinct was that I can take colors, I can do math on them, and then I would get like a really nice scale for color, right? It seems like very feasible. The trick with color is that colors don't act linearly. So there's this law, Weber-Fechner law, which says that increasing the quantity of the color, so like if you increase the saturation, it doesn't like change linearly. So if you look at this one, the first one, 3 and 4 are almost the same, right? Like the difference is 1, but 3 and 4 are similar. And instead, if you go 2 steps, like for example, if you see this is 1 to 2, 2 to 4, and 4 to 8, right? So the gap here is much more, and that is kind of how you get this thing, right? So it's not linear, is what I'm trying to say. By the way, there's this great talk by Diana Mounter, who's the design system lead or design ops lead at GitHub. She gave a great talk by Color, which kind of informed a lot of my opinions. This is another great slide which I took from Steve Sugar. He did this thing where he basically took all of the colors, right? So the hue, and he said 100% saturation with 50% brightness, right? So they're the same level, right? If you take all of the colors and put them at 50% brightness and put them on the chart, and luminosity is essentially like perceived brightness, right? How bright does the color look? So mathematically, they're at 50%, all of the colors, but you can see yellow looks really light, while at 50% blue already looks so dark. right? So it's like mathematically they're 50%, but they don't feel the same, and which is kind of the problem with colors. So um, there's this formula for perceived brightness, which I took from the same slides, which depends on RGB. So you can see R, G, and B have different weightage on how much they contribute to brightness, right? It's kind of derived from this. So if you look at blue, blue tends to go dark really fast, and yellow tends to go dark really slow. Or you should look at RGB. So there's RG, green is the one which is usually slower. So you kind of use their weightage accordingly, and you kind of get this formula, right? I didn't make this formula, but I like to follow it. And that kind of gets you to this place where colors like yellow, because just because of the hue they have, when you try to like make them darker, they kind of become this grayish brownish, not even brown, it's just like ugly grayish yellow, right? Which is not something you want. So when you're working with colors like this, you kind of have to make them, rotate them. So for example, this is kind of fading into orange and brown instead of its own yellow, right? So that's like one of the tricks. In Diana Monto's talk, she kind of talked about Rune Matson, who's done a lot of research on like how do you procedurally generate colors, which not just like are like basically this doesn't happen to them, but the second part happens. Like how do you use like what would be a good algorithm to generate colors that actually look good, right? And they scale for visuals and not for math. Um, I've linked it. I've linked it. I've linked it in the notes here on this URL. If you want to research like math and color, you can go there. Uh, I honestly didn't understand much from that paper, but it's interesting. So what I like to do is I like to use this tool called Scale. It's by Hayek, and I've taken the JavaScript yellow here. So the center one is JavaScript yellow, and what this tool lets you do is like you can say, give me 4 colors on the left, 4 colors on the right, and you can see how this like if I just modify the like keep which kind of goes into green, right? Or I can increase the hue, which kind of goes into red. Uh, so what I'm going to try to do, I'm going to rotate it like just a little so that it kind of goes into this orange brown thing. And this kind of becomes my yellow scale, where it's like if it's really dark, it goes into yellow, orange and brown land. Similarly, on the light side, I can also rotate it to make it go the other way. What I tried to do here is increase the saturation or decrease the saturation. Yeah, I decrease the saturation so that I get like slightly nicer shades here, right? So a lot of it still comes down to like how do you pick color, but I feel like modifying these values that are actually math at least give me a mental model of like how can I get a whole palette which is good, right? Or which at least like I like my taste thinks it's good. Let me show you another one. So for the Airbnb kind of site that I was creating, I needed that pink, right? So I took one pink that I thought was okay, and then I rotated by -5. So again, this part is still like hit and try, but I kind of was going for like a darker pink and a lighter pink shade so that I get like a whole scale. And my trick, this one is not backed by science. It's just like my personal trick, which is when I choose like the middle color, I try to choose what would the button be like, and if I put some text on the button, you can see that I use this lightest shade is the background of the alert, and the darkest lucky for us, we don't have to like create all of them on our own. There are a bunch of open source ones. So again, these are 3 that I like. I link them in the notes, and I use one of these as a starting point and tweak them until I found something that matched my liking. So how do you get this into React land? So very similar to font sizes. you can create like a color object. So for example, you see I have all of my pinks here, and I've basically just taken the pinks from this one, right? And I've copy pasted each one of them into like a scale of 100 to 100. The nomenclature is this nomenclature was made popular by material design. The names don't matter. You really just need a scale, and you can choose your own names for it. Let me show how that looks. Let's close this. Colors. Okay, perfect. Let me render this block. Yeah, so you see I have all of my colors here, right? And uh, how React UI, or how basically style system, the building blocks behind React UI, how they work is like you can give your CSS essentially, or the styles you give to your components are linked with your theme. So when I define these tokens, when I define like this is my pink set, I can use background color pink 100, pink 200, and they kind of read from the theme. So I can also change this to, let's say, grays, which I've already defined. And this is my gray palette, right? So now when I'm trying to build something, I'm not doing the color picker thing. I'm basically picking from, if I want it to be gray, I pick from one of these values. So I say background color gray 500. And if it feels too light, or if the contrast is not enough, then I bump it up or bump it down. So let's go back to our earlier example, because in this example, we can do something interesting. So so this part, the information that we try to like highlight less, it would be really cool if we could also use color to supplement it. So if I find, let me quickly find it. Yeah. So what's interesting about like the moment you're using JavaScript objects for defining your color system, you can also define decisions here, right? So I have the aliases essentially. So I have like a colors object over here, treat it like a config essentially. And then I can create my own variables here because they're all JavaScript objects. And I can say text has these four, which is body, which takes a gray. There's a subtle, which takes like one shade lighter. And then I have. So for example, in this color, in this text element, if I say color is text.body, right? Text.body is the default, of course. So text.subtle, you can see this color becomes a subtle color. And it's because it's picking from the JavaScript object of text.subtle, and then text.subtle actually points to gray 700. So once you basically define a small system like this, I'm never actually thinking about colors, right? I'm thinking about if it's secondary information, then it probably should be subtle. And then text component from React UI comes with a variant, which basically translates that. So you can say variant is subtle. So I'm looking at this information. I'm saying, okay, this is primary, this is secondary. So I'm going to make it subtle. I'm going to make it one size smaller. You can do the same thing with font weight. So I can say this weight is, let's say, semi-bold. I'm going to remove this one, or maybe semi-bold is too much. Let's go to medium. I kind of like semi-bold more. So I'm going to stick to that, and then also make this subtle. Actually, subtle was a bad idea. I'm going to stick to this, right? So you see, like the speed of iteration in which you can try design things and then make your decisions on what looks good to you is really fast, because I'm not trying to like pick colors from the universe. I'm trying to pick colors from my set, and I know that this is how I can create the hierarchy. I hope that made sense. Okay, let's talk about space. Space is kind of like probably the most important one, and it's also the easiest one for at least me to understand. So if you look at this layout on the left, the sizes they're all even numbers, but they have their distances kind of different between each one of them. And like when you look at it, there doesn't seem like any clear vertical rhythm is what people call it, right? Which is another way of saying it doesn't look harmonious together. Versus on the right side, this thing is put on an 8-point grid, and all of the heights, are multiples of 8, and the space between them are also multiple of 8. And that instantly creates like this nice visual hierarchy. Another example is this one, where the padding here, the margin between these two elements, the margin between two elements, they're all multiples of 8. And then the height is also a multiple of 8. So just by picking values of size which are multiplied by 8, you kind of instantly get like a nicer rhythm to your application. So the multiplier could be anything. People use anything from like 4 pixels, 8 pixels, 5 pixels, 10 pixels, could be anything. Uh, for applications, I like to use 4 pixels because it gives me a little more fine grained control. But if I'm working on a blog or like a documentation side where there's a lot more space, then I move to an 8-point scale for that. So React UI ships with a 4-point because you can get both from that. Let me show you how the space is defined. Oop, there's something in the chat. I hope I'm not interrupting. Okay. So space is kind of defined as a JavaScript object as well. And I try to define like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And first, and it's on a 4-point scale. So I say 0 is 0, 1 is 4, 2 is 8, 3 is 12, right? It's like a 4 multiplier going on. What this helps is like when I'm thinking of space, I don't think of how much space should it be in pixels or in the range. I think about like how many units of space do I want to give. So I don't know if I should keep the chat open because if I'm doing something wrong, then somebody can ask me. Okay. So if you look at this, actually, let me show you the example itself. That's nicer. Yeah. So you see, I have this stack, and like stack is a component that accepts gap. So it defines the gap between these components. And then I can increase them from 1 unit to 2 unit, 2 units to 3 units. And just because they're consistent, they kind of keep the vertical rhythm. I'm going to keep it 1. What's interesting is like the image and the text seem really close by. So I can use something like margin bottom, or I can use a CSS prop and give it margin bottom is 1, right? Again, 1 doesn't mean 1 pixels, it means 1 unit on the scale, which is on the 4-point scale, it's 4 pixels. And if I don't think it's enough, I can make it 2, and now it's like 8 pixels, right? So I kind of like this more. I'm gonna stick to it. Let me just try one more. That looks good. It probably feels a little too much, so I'm gonna come back to 2. So again, the speed of iteration is really nice because you can just go up, 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 and down, down, down. And you're on a harmonious scale. So it's just like all my options look better than what I would do when I'm picking like 17, 18, 19 pixels from the dev tool. All right, back to this. So what else can we standardize, right? Like once I got into this mode where things can be on a scale, I wanted to know more, like what else can I put on a scale to make my life easy? So one thing I found from material design is that their animations are actually on a scale. So if we look at this one, this opens and closes in like opens in 300 milliseconds, exits in 250 milliseconds. What's interesting is like the exit animation is faster than the entry, which makes sense because you want it to get out of your face faster, and the length of the animation is decided by how big is the size of the element. So for example, this one takes over the whole screen, so it has a bigger one as compared to this one, which is coming from just the corner. So this one is slightly faster. It's 250 entry and 200 exit. Compare that to a switch component, which is like really small and it should feel really instant, right? You don't want to wait. You want it to feel instant. So they have 100 entry, 100 exit. And if you look at it, all of these are also like the values they feel like they're on a scale, right? So I've tried to do this where the duration, you can put your durations also on a scale. So I basically took material design scale and put it here, which is like 100, 150, 200, 250. And let me show you the color example again. Because if you notice, the color example has this hover effect, where if I hover, the thing becomes slightly bigger. And it's coming from this swatch component where I basically scale 1.1, and then I have a transition duration. So transition duration, because it's a duration property, it will read from your duration scale. All of those are like internal mappings. And this, if I'm looking at this and this feels a little too slow, I can bump it down to 2 or maybe even 1. And this is like much more instant. But if I want to slow it down, I can like keep increasing to 5, right? A lot of things like animations are like, you have to use it, you have to look at it to see if it looks good, right? Like it's at least hard to me. It's hard for me at least to like write code and then be able to visualize if this animation is going to look good, right? I have to try it, I have to play with it to make up my mind. And that's why like having a scale like this really helps, because I basically go up, up, down, down until it feels good to me. So given all of that, right? Like if you sum all of those things up, this is my process, building everything with scales with React UI. I'm going to play this video and tell you what's happening. So I use a bunch of components from React UI, and you can see I'm using like size and margin. All of those are on the scale. I'm using the form field. This is just like a tiny accessibility thing there, where the form field gives you a label which is accessible. Uh, I'm styling the form field. So you see, I struggled here for a bit where I tried font size 3, then tried font size 4. I like font size 4, then I want to make it all caps. So I did the text transform CSS. And now when it's big, I like, okay, this is too big. I'm going to tone it down to 3, right? So it's like the whole process is kind of still like it's hit and try. It's you design by looking at things, but it's a lot faster and a lot better because it's built on constraints. I put these two elements together and then tried to figure out how much space. So I tried a gap of 2, gap of 4. 4 looked too much. I came back to 2. I'm wrapping this whole thing in a card now. So, and then giving it a width. And then I tried to play with the width, but I also tried to make it stick to like something that is divisible by 4 so that it still stays in my, like I don't break the visual rhythm that I've got going. And wait, I can show this in code. Right, so this is what's going on. And then if you see here, like first of all, like I have my space, which I showed you, I have the same font sizes. I also defined all of my colors. And I've gone as far as like defining shadows from places I like. So like this is the smallest shadow, then bigger, bigger, bigger. I've defined my line height, my font weight. And then the components here, I would recommend like not to worry too much about the syntax because like this is just a way of representing. The ideas are more valuable. So if you look at my input, I'm using color text body and the placeholder is text subtle. And when you click it, there's this blue hover that you see. And when you click it, like there's a darker blue, and all of these come from the blue scale. So I have like a hover blue 300, focus blue 500. I tried 4, I tried 5. Let me actually show you 4. Right. Oops, reload. Right. So 3 and 4 had nice contrast, but it did not seem bright enough to me. So I tried like a brighter shade, and that really like caught my. This looked really good to me, so I stuck to it. Let me show you the button as well. Button is just above. So button is using background pink 700, the one we chose earlier. And then because we made that scale for us, there was enough room for like hover and focus styles in between the darker colors as well. So that's kind of fun thing. You also see like the rhythm essentially is really, I mean, you can't see it here. Let me show you in a different place. There's an article on React UI. So this is the same field. And then you can see that this is what makes it look so good. Like when you look at this, it looks like somebody thought about it. But it looks good because all of the margins are essentially multiples of 8. So you see the label and input are 8 pixels apart. The heading and this are 16 pixels apart. The space between these fields is 16, right? The borders on the margins on the end are 32, and the inputs are 48. The button is 48. So you see, everything is just like multiplied by 8, and that's like, at least for me as a developer, it was such a cheat code to kind of know how people can make decisions faster. And now, if you compare these two, right? This was the one I made earlier. This is the one I made now. There's a lot of difference, right? And I tried to like put a background behind it. And so check this out, like compare this to the initial result. Let me show it to you for contrast. Uh, compare this, which is something I would usually do. Compare it to this, right? This looks designed. This looks like somebody knew what they were doing. And this looks like a website I might put my credit card in, right? Because it looks like it's designed. So I'm still not saying like this is perfect or this is really good, but the fact that it feels designed is already like a huge win for me because that's something that I've always struggled with. So when I talk to my designers, right, and like I didn't come up with this on my own, of course, I came up with this like people I've worked with and asking them a lot of questions. So a lot of the designers that you work with, they already have like an invisible system in mind, right? So for example, if I ask them about how much space, how did you decide how much space to put? They've always said like, yeah, I always use this, right? So there's a lot of things in like design theory or like that junior designers start with, and by the time they're like pro designers, it's just like part of the mental model that they don't even think about it anymore. So that's why it's like really difficult for them to explain it to me. But like I had to like poke them, go really far behind on like why designers do this. And this is kind of where all of it is coming from. So it's like every designer you work with already has like an invisible process like this, but just trying to take that invisible process and put it into code gave me like a really good mental model of like how I can code it. Yeah, I said like the where do you put the styles is totally up to you. If you put them in like a theme file over here, I've also put them in like a CSS prop on the form itself. Like I was trying to design this form label. It's totally up to you. I really wouldn't care so much about the syntax. In this case, the objects are just slightly nicer to interop with the theme. So if you find this useful, if you think like this gives you like a slight like introduction to like how you could design with just the right primitives, like having the right tools in your hands, then check out React UI. One of these is supposed to be a link. There you go. Yeah, you can go to the GitHub repo, or you can go to the domain, which is reactui.dev. And there's like getting started in core concepts. I really like, I don't mind if you don't use my library. That's not what this is about, but I really encourage you to like read the concepts behind it, because I think those are more valuable than the library. As I said, all the links for all the talks and articles I mentioned are on this URL. And thanks. I hope this was helpful. Cheers. Well, Kiran, you'll have to.
Yeah, awesome talk, Siddharth. Yeah, so if anyone has questions, maybe you can unmute and maybe ask questions.
Hey, Sid, this is Tanay. Great talk, by the way. I had a question when you're talking about rotating the color. What do you mean by rotating design newbie didn't understand?
Okay, so if we go back to this example, actually, let me take this example. So when we're looking at something like, actually, let me show you the JavaScript yellow, because that's a very nicely broken example. So when you look at this color, right, when we use a color picker, most of the time what we're doing is we take this color, right, and then we're trying to find it, like make it darker like this. And you can see how it very quickly turns into this gray, ugly kind of color, right? So what, instead of that, if you move to HSL instead of RGB, you can see like when I increase the L, which is luminosity, it goes to the lighter shade. If I want to go to the other way, I decrease the luminosity, and you see it starts going into gray. So instead of just going gray, I can also increase the hue. So this the hue goes on a radial scale. So I think it goes from like 0 to 255 or something, or 180. I'm sorry, I don't know. I can find out by 0 to 360. Okay, so it's like a perfect circle, right? So that's why when somebody says that let's rotate the hue, what they basically mean is like rotating on the 360 angle. So for example, I can rotate it and you see it tends to green, or I can rotate it in the other direction and it goes to yellow. So now when I decrease the luminosity, I don't get an ugly grayish thing. I turn more into brown. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I need like a proper radial kind of color picker to do a good job of explaining this.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, yes, Ed. I just want to know like some basics of the colors again. Okay.
Uh-huh.
So the major problem with my company, like designers are like selected the RBG color as a like the primary and secondary itself. So on the basis of logo, normally find out like what should be the color palette of our sites.
Right.
So I just want to understand like most of the times like designers comes with their own color code or something and they want specific that color only.
Right.
So I need to like put it as a customized way of like putting that color as a hard code value sometimes. Okay, which is really bad. I feel it. So that time the color palette, the way that you generated, doesn't comes in handy. So how can we?
So a lot of times, if you like, so I kind of like came from the same, what do you say, experience as you, where I see a hex code and then I have no explanation of why this hex code is the right hex code, and it's just a code, right? And then when you're working with it, it feels arbitrary. So what I found to be really nice is like going back to the developer, going back to the designers and asking them, how do they pick their colors, right? And if you're working with like, I don't want to like throw shade on anyone, but if you're working with like an experienced designer, they don't do the color picker thing either. They usually have like a set of colors that they choose from, right? And they go up and down. So even if your developer application might only have 2 or 3 blues, they actually already might have 3 or 4 more options that they want to pick from. And so the examples that I showed you, it's really rare that you would actually need, where are my colors? It's really rare where you actually need like 9 shades of red, right? Or like 9 shades of yellow. So if I show you the, like my work, oh, this is cool. I can actually show you live with Sandbox, sorry, GitHub. Right, so if I show you my color theme from work, we don't actually have all of the colors defined there. We only have a few colors. So we have 9 grays, but if you look at it, there are only like 3 red and there are only 3 blues, right? And we only have like 1 green, purple, and yellow because we don't have use cases yet where we needed the whole scale.
Don't see your screen, Sid.
Sid, you are
Oh,
not
shit.
sharing your screen.
Sorry, that is like Zoom mistake 101. Yeah, so this is like the Code Sandbox repo where I work in. And if you see the colors there, we have like 9 grays which we could identify, but there's only like few blues and few reds that we needed. And then there are things like green, purple, and yellow, which are just 1, because we essentially haven't hit those use cases where we need more than that. So a lot of times these are getting defined on the go. So for example, Danny, our designer, came up with these 3, but then we discovered we need a hover state, so we had to add something in between. And then it says Sid added this over here. So this is some color that we chose on the spot and then put it on the scale. So a lot of times it kind of goes back to, I think the difference has been like not asking the designer to give me a scale, but working with them to understand how do they pick colors and what's their invisible scale and putting that into code, right? And a lot of it is like, it develops as you do it with them. Does that, I know it's not like a very convincing answer, but that's kind of like the true answer. I wish like designers just gave you the whole palette and we got hard coded, but it's mostly like a iterative working with them kind of process.
Yeah, we're doing that only, and we somehow like fix it out. The typography somehow like is getting fixed out, but color is still not. We are not finalizing, or we are not in sync yet. So we are still trying to optimize that. Yeah, sure. I got the answer.
Color is really hard. So if you go to the talk by Diana Mounter on color, she talks about how GitHub changed their color, I think like 6 months ago. It's a great talk. Like color is really difficult. That's what I learned.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Ed.
Yeah, I have a question.
Hey.
Hey, yeah, great talks. This was really in depth. Like I really like the concept behind choosing a color. One problem that I faced with my website was that there is never one single color. Like when you're looking at the theme of your website, you will have one primary color, one secondary color, and might be one tertiary color also, right? You might have a contrasting color, or you might have like a triangular thing, like, one primary and then 2 on the 2 ends of a triangle.
Right.
So how do you take care of that in React UI?
Okay, let me go back to my screen then. Cool. So a lot of the work that has gone in is kind of based on the theming. So if I go to the button component, right, you'll see that button is something that has a lot of variants, right? And you can actually define your variants. So if I go to button, yeah. Oh, not this button. I'm thinking of like, where should I open? Let me open like the default light theme of React. Right? Yeah, so you see the button has like a bunch of variants, which has like a primary, and then it uses few shades of green to do the hover focus. Then there's a secondary, there's a destructive button, there's a link button. And then the alerts that I have like a default variant of warning, success, destructive, right? So every component that you look at, alert. Every component that you look at kind of has like a few like, as you said, like secondary, tertiary, or like how I like to call them is like destructive and second, like the names are still as arbitrary. But then once you start defining them in this way, you kind of start finding the same patterns. So do I have another one? Okay, let me show you the last design system that I worked on that has a better example. So alert. So you see this alert has the same warning destructive. And then when you look at a badge, the badge also has the same matching colors, right? So it's essentially like not only you come up with the color scale, you also come up with like primary, secondary is more like the decision layer, where you say, this is my destructive, on hover, this is how it changes. And then you try to use that across components. So if you think about like abstraction layers, there's the variables of colors, there's the decision of colors, and then there's the components that consume the decisions. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. Although, yeah, I had some supplementary question around the theming of an application, but I'll take that off like after, like
Right.
offline after all the sessions. Like that's an extension of this question, but this one definitely answers it. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, Sid. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, Sid. Akash here. Great talk about design system. It's really informative and also good work with the React UI. I just went through it. It's really good. So I was talking to you something about typography and everything, how it revolves around it. So a few months back, I came across Tailwind CSS, and what in their documentation, what they mention is everything revolves around REMs, mostly relative units. So in production ready applications, if we are building it from scratch, if we have everything in control, is it better to go with REMs and relative units rather than using pixels or points? Because a few months back, what I encountered was I was developing a website on Mac, and it was looking perfectly fine with pixels and points. And then one fine day, my lead comes to me and he's like, "Hey, you know what? This looks very odd in my system." And okay. Then I look into his system, and everything looks much bigger, right? So does how much of a difference does it make when not only in the typography part, but as you said, the spacing between everything has a unit with 8 points and stuff, right? So again, how does it flow with everything?
Yeah, so I understand the question. So when you define like and this is more like web what do you say, web compatibility stuff. So for example, if you define your values, I have to keep switching. When you define your values in pixels, right, it works very well if your base is also pixels. But then in browsers, you can actually redefine what your default font size should be, right? And it's like more like an accessibility feature where a lot of websites have small fonts. And if you can't really see well, which like will happen to all of us with age, you can bump up the font size, right? So I'm not saying control plus control minus, you can also change the default font size of the browser. So when you look at font scale, you kind of have to pick like your default. So for example, when I talked about the scale, right, I picked 16 pixels as the default, and then I'm going up and down. What you can do with the browser is you can change this default. So when you change this to 18 or 20, then your scale also gets multiplied by that, right? So that's why I can hear myself. Hello. Somebody who has speakers on, can you mute yourself? Hello. Thank you so much. Yeah, so when you use 16 pixels, you kind of hard coding 2 pixels. So what's like the proper way to do this essentially would be if you define this as your body, right? If you go to body and say font size is 16, right? 16 pixels in unit, then this becomes 1 rem, right? And then you should define these not as 14, but more like 1 by 1.125, like whatever that value is, that becomes in rem, right? I think that's what Tailwind CSS also does. And I've had this conversation with Adam Baden, who's the author of Tailwind, where this is the right way to define, the values. Let me open this. Yeah, so these are the right way to define the values. but it's like a very hard way of working with the values, right? So the best way that I've come up with is basically you still define three, like you define them as 1 point, like 1, 2, 3, 4. Same goes for spacing, that you define them in the way that you can think, right? So I can think in the 4-point grid. I can't think in like 1.175 rem. But then you take this as 1 rem. So then you change this value. This would be 0.75, I guess, which is equal to 12 pixels, right? So first you define your scales in pixels. Then you take the base value, convert it into rems, so that these values are always the one that the browser renders, but you're always thinking in pixel values. Does that make sense? There's like a difference between how you can think easily while designing and what the browser actually renders so that it stays accessible.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. So does the spacing and everything, or the grid layout also changes with the increase or the decrease in the size of pixels, or according to the browser?
Yeah. Both, like the moment you use rem values, space, border radius, font size, like any unit that is in pixels or rems, it propagates everywhere.
So that is the standard way of, the right way of approaching it.
Yeah, that's the accessible way of approaching this. It's like render rems in the browser and then create a system that you can think. Like I like to think in pixels, but then that should get converted to rems.
Yeah. So maybe, so it's better that we have a SAS mixin that could do it for us at a browser level, at a body level, and then we could use that in wherever the document we want.
I mean, if you're writing SAS, then yes. The way I like to do this is like I just have a scale. So then in the scale, instead of writing 14 pixels, I just write 0.825 rem.
Okay.
Right, and I'm still thinking I'm still thinking pixels, but it's not what's getting rendered is in rems.
Yeah.
I should create a GitHub issue for that. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, just to add one point here, like we can use the polish library also. Like it will, like you can still go ahead with the pixels, but while rendering, you can get it a RAM value. So it will convert your pixel value to the RAM directly.
Yeah, what's funny is that so it kind of comes down to like how do you want to author your styles versus how do you want to render your styles, right? So converting to like pixel to them is you can use polished, you can use like just a tiny math formula, but what's key is that it goes into the rendering layers and not in the authoring layers, right? Like you shouldn't be thinking polished pixel to them. You should hide it under an abstraction